All right, team, we are back in the Fireside PM podcast. And I realize I may be having a tradition here of having former managers on the show. And I've got Karl Isaac, who was my manager back in 2002 when I was a summer intern at Microsoft. So, Karl, welcome to the show, my friend.
Thanks, Tom. And I realize it's a little late, but we never did do that performance review. So I was hoping we could do it now, if that's okay. I have my notes.
Yeah, as long as it comes with a bonus, I'm all good with that. Oh, I also remember, didn't you switched roles before I joined full time or before I started full time?
Yeah, I moved into branding. So
Yeah.
when we started working together, we were doing biz dev, and you were such a great hire and a super entrepreneur caught in the confines of a giant corporation, and we brought you in. It was so exciting.
I remember when I accepted the role after that summer, I was like, oh, yeah, Karl Taylor, I like these guys. And then I think before I started full time, you let me know like, oh, hey, making some changes. And I
Yeah.
was like,
Well,
oh,
that
man.
change, if it's any consolation, the change I made was I endured for the rest of my career. So
Yes.
I
Yeah.
left biz dev and went into the world of brand and marketing. So
I love it. I love it. Well, good for you. It sounds like it was a good move. But maybe you could just start with a little bit of a overview of your kind of career journey. You've done so many interesting things, and I think people would love to hear about it.
thanks, Tom. Yeah, it's been a great journey. I would call it quite a non-linear journey. So I didn't set out always to want to be a brand builder and marketer, but I started my career actually in architecture and have a master's in design, and then got my MBA and was at Apple as a senior product manager in a job that just sounded so sexy at parties, like senior product manager reporting into a little team right into Steve Jobs' group. Really, really cool. We were launching .Mac services, so we were appropriately called iTools.
Of
There's a
course.
picture of us somewhere standing under a sign, and we did look like a bunch of iTools. But it was really cool. It was really the precursor to SaaS. I was senior product manager for something called iDisk. Um, I then jumped from there over to Microsoft, where I was for 8.5 years, where we met Tom, and I started out doing business development, building third-party experiences into Office products, but also selling advertising, which is something you and I were doing a lot of, into the Microsoft Office online site. Then I went over and discovered, I had really missed sort of the creative background that I had. And so as I moved more into that biz dev role with you, and we were inside an engineering organization, and so it was really tech heavy, and I kind of hungered for a bit more of the creative orientation I used to have when I was a designer. And so moved over into the world of brand. I managed the Office brand and the Windows Mobile brand of Microsoft, which I used to joke was number 8 on a list of 2 things that mattered on a mobile phone purchase decision. But it was so incredible because I actually managed that brand when we introduced the iPhone. Or not we, sorry, when Apple introduced the iPhone. So that was a massive, a great experience. I also built and launched the Microsoft Dynamics brand in the CRM and ERP space. And then the huge last thing I did at Microsoft before I left, I led the response Microsoft had to Apple. Apple had a really successful campaign called Get a Mac. And we responded with something called I'm a PC, actually building on a lot of their work. And for those people that may remember, like 2 people standing in a white screen environment, and we basically democratized their, they sort of made Microsoft look like a bunch of nerds, but we then showed like the democratization of technology. Apple wasn't as pervasive at the time. So that was an incredible experience. And then I always just hungered to get closer into the creative world. And so I went agency side, and I was at an agency called Razorfish, which
Mm-hmm.
and I actually serviced the Microsoft account. So I ran the Microsoft account at Razorfish, then loved the agency world. I moved down to San Francisco from Seattle and was executive director of digital branding at Landor. It was my belief that digital branding shouldn't be a thing. It's just called branding.
Mm-hmm.
But Landor was really known for like packaging and um, more physical design assets. And so there was a huge opportunity for them to really transition from analog to digital, which I helped with. And I then went, probably my biggest two roles. I was at Adobe, global head of brand for Adobe for 4.5 years from 2012 to the middle of 2016. So a little era where many case studies have been written about because we actually, shifted our whole model to cloud-based subscriptions and also had acquired Omniture. And so we moved into digital marketing really in a really big way. And I would say that time at Adobe really was a huge departure from my experience at Microsoft. When I was at Microsoft, I worked with some of the most amazing people and smartest people. Yet somehow we managed to miss social, search, and mobile, sort of the underpinning of the economy at that time. And when I was at Adobe, we took a big swing and got it right and had just a transformational experience. I then left Adobe and went to work for the chief product officer over at eBay, where I was vice president of global brand. And it was a really incredible experience because we moved brand out of marketing. It typically sits in a marketing function, which we can talk about in a little while, and put it under product for a very important and specific reason, which I know we'll get into. Namely that I believe the brand is the product, the experience is the brand, and so we'll circle back to that. I'll just say a couple more quick things about my experience. I left eBay in 2018 and decided to launch an agency, which went incredibly well. And then during the pandemic, was a really challenging period for many of us, and I made a few really exciting changes. One is I decided to offer much more like fractional marketing work and fractional. So I've been a fractional chief marketer, chief marketing officer, and chief brand officer for all sorts of kinds of companies, including many early stage startups. But then I also have my agency, Hi It's Us, and continue to offer, really cool agency services. Most of my clients are tech, but not all of them. I've branched out and done a bunch of things with some retail brands and services brands. And so happy to talk to you about all that. But most important thing is I live here in Los Angeles and going through a really hard time at the moment. Fortunately, we're safe and okay, but my thoughts are with sort of all the people of LA. It's been really a devastating moment with all the fires from the Pacific Palisades and Hollywood and Pasadena and Altadena. So you catch me at a really weird time. And so if I'm a little more philosophical or express a little more gratitude, roll with me because literally Rome is burning outside the window.
Yeah, you must be checking the status of the fires on a minute-to-minute basis. Like, are things settling down? I heard in the news this morning that like there should be less wind. Does that mean like we can get this thing under control? Or
it's crazy because in an era of like never having access to more information, it's actually been really hard to get good information. And so there is an app called Watch Duty, which pretty much all of LA is on at the moment. And you can see minute by minute what's happening. But even that is, not exactly as easy. And there's a lot of like rumors running around and you talk to people. And so not unlike what's going on in the tech industry, there's a lot of misinformation out there. And so it's been really important to get, for my own peace of mind, to just get access to credible news, which you probably will agree is harder and harder to find these days.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I was just talking to my kids last week, and they were like, "Oh, when I have kids, I'm going to be able to tell them that I lived through a global emergency, with the pandemic." And I was saying to them, like, guys, it feels like there's these major events a little more often than every century now.
Yeah, I
And
think sadly it won't be the only experience. And the other thing about the kids your age, and my kids are just a little older, but also is the generation just has it really hard. Not only did they live through a global pandemic, but the cost of universities has skyrocketed compared to what it was when you and I went through, and cost of home ownership is super far to reach, and there's tons of issues around social media, and then the depression and anxiety that's caused. And so I know there's some of my clients, I had the good fortune of working with a company called Lyra. You may know them. They offer mental health services for companies.
yeah.
And that was incredible. And just mental health issues are very real, not only for that generation, frankly, for all generations, ourselves included. And it's so wonderful that conversation has been destigmatized, and you can actually speak more openly about it and say what it was like when we first entered the workforce. But I will say I feel a lot for teens and kids and young adults in their early 20s these days. It's a very different world. And, from a brand lens, I always try and keep that in mind. I'm doing a lot of work right now with companies that focus on like Gen Z audiences. And I've been in this industry long enough when I remember when we would debate whether we should market to millennials. Now it's, down Gen Z and soon Gen Alpha. So, yeah.
Yeah, I wonder, like, from a brand perspective, because folks in that younger generation are going through such difficulty, does that mean that some of those traditionally, like, super positive, bright, everything's great brands, like, that's kind of going to be tone deaf if you try and launch with that? Like, do people want, like, more real, like more authentic, or more kind of balanced brands? Like, how does that world, kind of the world is changing stuff, translate into how a company should think about a brand if they're coming up with a new one?
Yeah, it's such a good question, Tom. And frankly, there's no single right answer, because different people are experiencing things in very different ways. There's still a lot of places that are deeply in the throes of like COVID, for example. And so it depends on what market you're talking about and what kind of geography you're talking about, and then also what your brand is about and what it stands for. Right now, I'll say shockingly, it's actually gone the other way, because of all the seriousness in the world around us. A lot of brands are leaning into like whimsy, and I think for some people it's a relief, it's a vacation, it's a moment to sort of just like gravitate to something away from like the heaviness of the news all around us. With that said, especially for the younger generation, they can smell bullshit a mile away. And so, brands that are funny and engaging, I think there's still a lot of room for. Brands that are misleading or overly sort of advertising, in terms of their approach, I think people get turned off to. And probably not just your kids' generation, but us too. Most people don't want to be, turns out, little secret. You heard it here first. You can break this across the internet, Tom.
Okay, let's do it.
Most people don't want to be marketed at. Shocker, right? Like, no one walks around like, gosh, I got one. But with that said, people have learned to game things, right? Like, we all know that if you want a good deal on something, you can go in, put it in your shopping cart, and then maybe not check out. In a little while, a good email offer will appear. And I think many people appreciate clever relatable advertising. But as a whole, I think we're all really cynical and skeptical of what companies have to say. And that's what a lot of the research says as well. Not only companies, but governments and
Mm.
leadership. And so, large part of that is because we have a lot more access to information. But coming back to a point I made earlier, how do we know whether that information is credible or not?
Yeah, totally agree. I have a bunch of follow-up questions. I'd love
Let's do it.
to go in the order of your career. The Apple to Microsoft move, I'm guessing the culture was very different. I was also curious why you went from product to biz dev, because what drove that interest in doing biz dev?
I love like networking and negotiating and really like opening brands up to their communities. And so I saw like at Apple doing biz dev, which, I just started to do when I was there, even in the product role. Like I was running this thing called iDisk. And just for people that don't know it, it was a little hard drive that sat on your desktop and you could drop files into. And then magically, someone else could open up
Wow.
that drive and take the files out. And so that was a precursor to cloud. But we realized that like it wouldn't it be better if there was also like an ecosystem of apps before the app store.
Mm-hmm.
And and so I was starting to get excited about like the ecosystem and how do we build community. And so one of the things I was trying to work on was there was this thing called SETI at home where you could use your computer for computer's processing power when you're not using it to help search for extraterrestrial life.
Yeah, I
And so
remember
I
that.
was trying to cut deals with the SETI at home people and all sorts of interesting businesses. And I got really excited about that. And this opportunity opened up at Microsoft. And I had a 3-month-old. Living in Palo Alto wasn't the easiest. And I thought Seattle would be a great place to, build a family. But I also really got attracted to just the experiences my colleagues were having at Microsoft. I found, and to be clear, the transition from Apple to Microsoft is what piqued my interest in brand holistically, because I saw the difference between how brands are perceived on the outside versus what companies are like on the inside. And so when
Mm.
I made that change, this was not too long after the DOJ had found Microsoft to be an anti-competitive monopoly. And it was sort of the imagery was like Darth Vader was roaming the halls, right, at
Mm-hmm.
Microsoft. And I found my experience to be nothing like that. People were so open and
Mm-hmm.
so positive and interested in working with startups and interested in doing good in the world. And conversely, at Apple, the reputation was, hey, the perception was, this is like the anti-corporate corporation, right? And think
Mm-hmm.
different and all of that. And on the inside, it's a lot more hierarchical and buttoned up than one would
Mm-hmm.
think. And so that really piqued my interest in sort of the change in perceptions and sparked my interest in branding.
I love it. Now, when you moved from Microsoft Biz Dev to Microsoft Brand, and you worked on what was the campaign where it was all white background and
Yeah. So it started out as something called Life Without Walls or Windows, but it evolved into something called I'm a PC.
that was a response to an Apple campaign
Yeah.
that they made the kind of Microsoft guy look kind of like portly and
Like a nerd.
yeah.
Like back when this was before nerds were considered cool.
Yes.
Like, and so they made him just look like, or maybe they made him just look more like an accountant. And
Yeah.
you know what we did? We found an engineer at Microsoft that actually looked kind of like that guy. And we started our response to that commercial with him talking about how he was made into a stereotype. And then we talked about the democratization of the PC. And we had people like Deepak Chopra and
Mm.
Pharrell and scientists and Rem Koolhaus and like people really into, fashion designers, really talking about and expressing solidarity for the PC. And at the time, keep in mind that Apple laptops were way more expensive than, say, PCs. And so it really helps humanize and democratize the PC, which frankly, I think is something that really credible about Microsoft. They've always been about democratizing technology.
Yeah, I love it. And then when you moved to Razorfish, managing the Microsoft account, what was that kind of role? Because you kind of went to the other side, right? Or what was that like? Other side of the table?
Yeah, you'd think a bit, yeah. Except for the funny reality is that at the time we were actually still owned by Microsoft. So I left Microsoft to go to an agency to service Microsoft that was also actually owned by Microsoft, and I ran the account. And that was a really fascinating experience. But it was cool because it brought me to China and Japan and all sorts of on all sorts of interesting projects. I was doing both strategy work and overseeing the account, and so it was an incredible experience. And I kept the reason I did it is there's this book called like Now Discover Your Strengths, you may know. And it asks the basic question of like, is it better to get better at something that you're good at or improve something that you're not good at? And its argument is get better at the things you're good at. And I that really resonated with me. And I love creativity and I love the power creativity can have on business. And so I kept wanting to get closer and closer to that creative spark. Now I'm at the epicenter of it. Like I literally do a lot of that work myself. But at the time, I was working with creative teams.
Now, before we move off of Microsoft, you mentioned in your maybe time at Adobe that Microsoft has some really smart people and missed a lot of major trends that in many ways it was positioned to be a leader in. Like, why do you think that happened?
Well, I mean, that's a huge question and a very long question, but let's cut to the chase on a few key themes. Microsoft isn't alone in that. A lot of companies, didn't Kevin Systrom work at Google for a long time before leaving to found Instagram? And lots of companies do that. But one thing that Microsoft did not do well at that time, which I think changed now under Satya, is they just didn't listen to a lot of people. There was a lot of hubris. They didn't listen to their customers. They didn't listen to their partners. They didn't listen to their more junior employees. And it took me a little while to kind of like unlearn some of those habits. And so when I ran teams like at eBay, the team I ran, like I would bring more junior people into the meetings with the CEOs and give them a voice, give them an opportunity to share their voice, because I feel like the old way of doing it, which was you earn your seat at the table, you're quiet for literally like a year or two, you don't speak unless spoken to, you sit at the back of the room. Usually there was like a row of chairs behind the table. Basically it was doing everything. The old models would do everything they could to kind of suppress things that didn't fit their narrative. And one thing that junior people are really good at is telling the truth. Maybe they're too naive to know that like later in careers, people play politics and you might not want to say that thing. And like, they'll just tell it like it is. And I think a lot of companies need a lot more of that. And Microsoft didn't do a good job of clearly at that time of listening.
Yeah. I still remember there were meetings at Microsoft where the senior exec, like one time a person, he put his feet on the desk and like kind of like as we were presenting, and I was just like, this is totally a hierarchy here, and we know who's a senior person.
You know what's cool about the era we're in now, Tom, is that there's just that kind of stuff wouldn't happen.
Yeah.
Like that, and it gives me hope for, like, as my kids are entering the workforce and as your kids go into the workforce, like it'll be frankly, it'll be a different workforce, but it'll be a better environment in the sense of like being inclusive and not basically the management philosophy at that time. There was a lot of people, I didn't subscribe to it, but a lot of people that believed in intimidation. And to me now, the key thing that people subscribe to is actually vulnerability. Frankly, even having this conversation, Tom, we wouldn't have done this kind of a transparent conversation about it many years ago. And leading with vulnerability is so important. It really breaks down barriers. So I'll just give you an example. When you lead with vulnerability and you share things and kind of like lower the waterline and expose a little bit more of yourself, that tends to build empathy. And empathy is the cornerstone of innovation and collaboration, I should say. And we need teams collaborating. And by contrast, if you're self-righteous and guarded and siloed, no one's going to want to work with you. And you're not going to be able to collaborate. And consequently, you're not going to be able to innovate as quickly. And I think that's another big part of it, right? You remember all the like silos at Microsoft, and granted, there's exceptions to every rule, right? And for every point I'm making, you could certainly find a company that succeeded by doing it. But I'm inspired by sort of kindness in the workplace that exists right now, and the ability to, inspire people to do their best through kindness and through service and through vulnerability, as opposed to through intimidation and authority. And I think that'll yield a better outcome.
Yeah, I'm in your camp. It does make me wonder about some counterexamples, like how Elon has run Twitter, or how he's known to run Tesla. It doesn't seem like a very big place for empathy and vulnerability.
But and it's a roller coaster ride, and there's a lot to unpack around him. But like, what's it going to be like for us as we head into this new administration, and frankly, as we have wildfires burning, and there is no brand safety on those platforms, and people can do and say whatever they want. And you saw the announcement of Facebook, like just this week. Mark Zuckerberg just got rid of all of its moderation, and and will rely on just community moderation. And so I've seen a lot of hubris throughout my career, and historically, hubris doesn't result in breakthrough performance. So do you remember like Evan Spiegel at Snapchat when he changed the whole UX design and didn't listen to the testing? It like tanked. And do you remember Microsoft launched the Kin and we had to pull it after 3 weeks? And of course there's always exceptions, and frankly there's a difference between having conviction and having hubris. And
yeah, how would you define the difference? That's a really interesting one.
I would say that like if we look at what Apple did, they had a lot of conviction, right? Like they didn't do ad testing, right? They're like one of the famous companies that didn't do that. They Steve Jobs had a lot of opinions about product testing, and that your customers don't necessarily know what they want when you're innovating and showing them something new. That's different than kind of ramming things down people's throats. And I think there's a responsibility in technology when you are a huge platform like X and Facebook to have credible access to information. And so that comes from ego. Frankly, why is it called X, Tom? Was Twitter not working as a brand? No. You know why it's called X? Because Elon wanted to stitch it together with his other X companies, SpaceX, Tesla X, other X's, and he owned that X for a long time. It was just waiting. That's hubris, right? That isn't. I don't see a customer benefit today. And frankly, Twitter was a love. I mean, it had its issues, but as a brand, people had a lot of affinity for it.
Yeah, I remember when they made that change, which, by the way, didn't feel like it was a very well orchestrated rollout. It just
That's why I'm saying it's
changed.
hubris. It was done overnight.
I thought it was a bug.
He threw a giant X on the roof of the building without
Yeah.
even having building codes and permits. Some people applaud that, Tom. Some people applaud how he went out, and was it Iowa or Idaho, and like ripped out servers in a weekend that his engineering teams told would take like 6 months. A lot of stories and folklore around this like hero mythology, but when you're a technology platform, you also have a responsibility to your communities. And are we better served right now on these platforms without any kind of moderation? And who is their audience? Their audience are advertisers and brands. Do brands want to appear on, amongst content that could be anything because there's no more brand safety and no more policing other than community policing? Time will tell, but I think no.
Yeah. I mean,
and
I think
Elon also said his advertisers can go fuck off.
Yes, he did tell them that they could do that to themselves. What's interesting is even now, long after they made the change, people still refer to Twitter as many people.
You took a brand that used to be called Twitter, and they would report like about a tweet or said on Twitter, and now they say on X, formerly Twitter.
Yeah, like a year later, they're still
all
saying
the time. Yeah.
Yeah, that seems like as a brand person, that must have been heartbreaking to see such a valuable asset kind of flushed down the toilet like that.
I wrote a whole post at the time. It's still up. Anyone's welcome to read it, about how you could learn more about branding from watching the show The Bear than the X train wreck, because he had done, the two were like very popular right around that same time. And it centered on this idea that X was all about hubris and sort of inserting yourself. And The Bear is all about, I don't know if you've seen that show or not.
I've heard about it, but I haven't watched it.
Well, you got to watch it. It's an incredible show about a chef and, the restaurant staff. But it's all about collaboration. And it's all about, synchronization, and it's all about experimentation. And, I don't want to spoil it, but it's those to me are very important hallmarks in brand building, right? We're in this era today, Tom, of it's better to be present than perfect, right? Like not everything needs to be. I mean, I don't know why we're talking about Twitter so much, but since we are talking about them, the first Twitter logo was $6 stock art of a bird as their logo, right? And so, not everything needs to be precious and sculpted and refined. I'm fully on board with a lot of the product led methodologies of kind of moving, more quickly and rapid prototyping and test and learn. And I apply a lot of that to my approach to brand as well. And that's why a lot of that was in the show The Bear, which conversely was not the case with what Elon did at X.
Yeah. I got to ask you about having brand in the product org at eBay. Yeah. I've not heard of that done before. And I will share that I think a lot of our viewers, like me, in product roles have always, admittedly, probably we shouldn't have, but we looked at brand as like, well, that's for later, or I don't know, they do a bunch of things, but we're shipping software. We have roadmaps. That's going to be, it's product-led growth. Yeah. tell me about the decision to kind of have brand and product in the same org.
Well, let's take a step back from that, though. Well,
did I throw down some fighting words there?
No, it's great. I was anticipating it. Why do we think that they're different things? If you create an amazing product, are you not shaping a brand experience? And if you solely, if you do some incredible brand work, are you not contributing to and setting an expectation for what someone will have with the product experience? We have created these like artificial boundaries, and I'm not sure why. I do understand companies have employees, and those employees work in organizations, and to scale, employees need specialization. But why don't product leaders consider themselves brand leaders, and why don't brand leaders care more about the product experience, and why don't both care more about the customer, and why are they all in different groups?
Let me take a stab. I'll take a stab at a potential answer, which is that the skills one needs to organize a product strategy and a roadmap and get things done with engineering and design are different than maybe the brand team's skills. And similarly, like you probably, if you put a PM in a brand team, I don't know how they would do. They may not be very
Tom, I appreciate that perspective. However, you are thinking about brand as a team, but brand is an action, and it's an action that customers experience, just like product, right? Like you're building a product, but the product isn't the product. Like the product is what people are using. It's not about, do you remember at Microsoft, we used to like put box software every time you ship something? Shipping isn't the goal, right? The goal is people using the product. And same thing with brand. Like the brand isn't about a brand team, and it's not about your guidelines, and it's not about the rules. It's about what your customers are doing, and what are they thinking and feeling, and what are they saying, and what is your community? Is your community coming to your defense if you're having an issue in a moment in time? And so let's take the conversation out of an organizational structure. And I did tell you I'd be a little more philosophical today. And let's look at it more holistically. What is the purpose of product? Ultimately, it is to contribute to the value of the shareholders and the company and the employees, and to create experiences that people love and crave and delight them, and to make money and all those things. Brand is, when done well, 100%, if not 1,000%, aligned with those very, very same metrics. The difference is, I think, product tends to approach things linearly and rationally, and brands tend to be experienced non-linearly and emotionally. But brand isn't advertising, and brand isn't a logo, but it includes those things. We make decisions every day about things we want to use or not use, and why. Like, why am I not on X anymore? Maybe it's the product experience, maybe it's the leadership, maybe it's the brand, and I used to love that brand. And so we make choices every day, and brands can help set expectations and maybe encourage people to consider those products and services, but also they can help, when done well, rally their communities. Like, I love community-owned brands. And wouldn't it be cool if we thought, instead of product-led growth, we thought about community-led growth? And then we asked ourselves, what are the levers that can help build a strong community? Well, part of it includes a great product experience. Part of it includes pricing. So when I speak, when I've been inside of companies, I'll often ask people, like if I'm in all hands, I'll ask people how many people do they think are on the brand team? And, answers will range from 5 to 35 people.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, no, it's all 30,000 of us. It's all 100,000 of us, right? Like, why don't product leaders consider themselves responsible for the future of the brand? And I think it has to do with a different mindset. I think it has to do with different KPIs and metrics.
Mm-hmm.
Like if you gave a brand leader, by the way, like let's talk product for a minute, right? Like, don't you think like the onboarding experience is a brand experience, and the what happens in your first 30 days is a brand experience, and whether you're likely to recommend after using it is a brand experience? Like these are all brand touch points as well as product or service touch points. And so I've been really successful encouraging people to think less narrowly about the definition of brand and hopefully appropriate more or take more ownership and responsibility for what they're creating. Because what they're creating isn't a set of features. If you think of product as a set of features, sure. I mean, and I understand you have to ship things and you have to build things and you do have to like scope things and execute things. But isn't the point and the purpose ultimately to delight customers? And isn't that at that point a brand conversation as much as a product conversation?
I think it is. I also think that the incentives and how people are measured and rewarded in product organizations is usually, I launched this thing. Here's the numbers before I launched it. Here's a chart going up and to the right. I've landed this impact.
Yeah.
I've done a great job. And it's not about the full customer
Right. I'll
experience.
give you an example. When I was at eBay, we were very clear and intentional in wanting to change a perception. People thought we were an auction model, and people thought we were a place to find weird, hard to find one off items. We spent millions of dollars and tons of resources to change that perception so that people understood eBay has new inventory. You can get things fast. You can return things. They have money back, guarantees. We invested all this effort. And yet sometimes the product team would just put things up that were about the auction model. And you're like, wait, why are we spending all this money? And then you get on the homepage of eBay and you're reinforcing a legacy perception. And so when I talk about aligning these functions, it's so that the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. It's so that the work a product team's doing is as valuable to shaping the brand as the media dollars that get spent to change that. Because when those divisions occur, it's confusing to customers. And ultimately, customers don't think about, we ran into this problem together, Tom. Office, when we did biz dev for Microsoft, we had something called Office Online.
Mm-hmm.
And that was a marketplace for, with an ad revenue model, and you could find add-ins for Office.
Mm-hmm.
But there was another site called like office.microsoft.com.
Yeah.
And that was a totally different thing. Right. And, what is that about? And so what I encourage, and one of the things why Adobe was so successful, is that we reconcile that. We made some huge change. We made a change to our business strategy, our product strategy, and our brand strategy. And we centered that all around community. And, it was transformational. And so these things should be self-reinforcing. And a lot of experiences happen through product. I mean, do you remember how viral Slack was in its earliest days?
Mm-hmm.
How much money did Slack spend on advertising? Not a lot. But wasn't it still a brand experience that people were having? And you could do all these fun things and gifts and third-party add-ins and order your Taco Bell from Slack and all these cool things that were part of the joy of using the product. And so the reason, to circle back to your original question, that brand was part of product is to help signal that brand is so much more than marketing, and to not think of brand only as marketing. It's inclusive of marketing, but not limited to. Pricing impacts brand, operations, customer success, product, and then in more specifically in eBay's case, we had some legacy issues that were about the product. And so we wanted a more holistic approach that connected our, brand systems, our design identity, our perception change, our vision with the experiences people were actually building and offering customers.
Karl, what would be an example of something that you did at eBay within the product org that was good for eBay that would not have been possible had you been structured like in the traditional way where a brand is like off on in its own area?
Well, we led a cultural change within the company. When we rebranded eBay, we had just separated from PayPal, and we redefined our audience, our mission, our purpose, our visual identity, our brand strategy, and even some of the experiences. But the hardest thing that changed was that we inspired the entire company through dialogues like this to think very differently about the experiences they were actually creating. And so for at the time, this was like 2016, 2017, we were trying to reach Gen Z audiences. And, we built something called ShopBot, which was using AI and computer vision to take 1 billion items in our eBay catalog, which is how much we had at the time, and serve it to 1 billion, daily active users in Facebook Messenger, because we were able to inspire them to think like, what are we going to talk to Gen Z about coming to eBay? And then they're going to see that it takes 7 days to see if you win your auction, and then it's going to take another 7 to get to you. And we knew we had to go to eBay. We had to go to our audience. They weren't going to come to us. And so we did that. And that was a holistic brand strategy, but also a product-led, push. And eventually that technology got built into the eBay experience. But you could take a picture of an item and it would show up in Facebook Messenger, and you could see how much it would cost on eBay and choose and buy it right there and get it in 2 days or less. All of that work to contribute to change the perception that eBay was a modern marketplace and not like a legacy auction house.
Yeah, that's very thought-provoking. There's probably ideas like that sitting in other brand teams at other tech companies that will never get executed on because the product and engine and brand are generally not that close.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I did at Adobe, right? We were all about community. Anytime you launch an Adobe product on the creative side, so whatever, Illustrator, Photoshop, whatever, you'll see a splash screen come up. And that splash screen uses community-based artwork because of the brand, because of our brand strategy, because, I led that effort. That was a product effort and, made the recommendation. The question was, what should we do with our splash screen? My initial response is we shouldn't have a splash screen. Let's just launch really quick. But, engineering felt otherwise. It would take a little moment to load up. And so we decided, and I made the recommendation to use community-based artwork because I had made a huge push at that time to turn our brand over to our community. I actually, when I first started at Adobe, CEO told me not to mess with the Adobe logo because one of the founder's wife designed it, and I actually, at great risk, didn't listen to that and invited the whole community in to hack, tinker, and experiment with the logo. And there's a program still going today called the Adobe Remix. And from that, we then looked to weave the community work even more tightly into the product experience with attribution and so much more. So, Tom, I know we've been chatting a while and your audience may find this lengthy. So let me just leave you with the thought that to open the aperture of the conversation, to actually, as a brand leader, as a product leader, see yourself as a brand leader as well. And you know that product leaders have a lot of opinions on brand. So why not embrace it and work with your brand teams instead of looking at it as a checkbox, like we have to go through legal, we have to go through brand. Brand isn't about getting the colors right. It's about, getting the purpose right. And as the product and the experience is more important than the identity that it signifies or that is signified. And so how do we create and product experiences that customers crave? And great ideas can come from the brand team. We've launched many. One last quick thing I'll tell you, at eBay, I ran a brand lab, a brand innovation studio. So one of the things, for example, we asked is, when you type girls bike into the search bar, why do all the results come back as pink bikes? Like, why not? I mean, have you not seen female cyclists and female athletes and the amazing things they can do? And so we showed how we can help change perceptions by changing the search results, and just things like that went a long way.
Karl, what a fascinating conversation. I think maybe one thing that I would share with the product folks out there is, if your interaction with the brand team is at launch review, and that's the first time you're like, oh, by the way, we're launching all this stuff, you may want to think about some of Karl's advice here, because it sounds like you don't think that brand should be that separate. It should be intertwined. It's part of a holistic effort from the beginning.
Because why? Because that's what customers expect. And that's what, in the end, we should work backwards from that and connect customer expectations with the organizational design that then supports those kinds of experiences. And so I do think product leaders can build amazing brands. In fact, they have. And I do think brand leaders can create amazing product experiences. The problem is most people look at brand as police, and that's about protecting intellectual property as opposed to creating intellectual property, and about co-creating with your communities. And so there's a lot of great brands out there that do that kind of work. And, I think we're in a new era here where we have access to more tools and, technologies that can help us even shape those brands faster and experiment quicker. We should do much more of that. And so I know product leaders have a lot of sort of linear and rational steps in the process, and more power to them, because you need every bit of that. But as you're doing that, ask yourself, am I making a deposit in the brand bank or a withdrawal? Is this going to shape? Am I creating an auction model at a company that's trying to change that vision, or am I, contributing to the future of where we're headed?
Karl, for a product person that doesn't think about brand a lot, like, how would you help give them a short definition of how they should think about what brand is? You're saying it's not logo, it's not the style guide, it's more than that.
Yeah, it's ultimately what customers believe it to be. It's the experience that customers are going to have. And so, we're all responsible for shaping that experience. And now brands have a lot of templates and toolkits and definitions. And sometimes that does a disservice to brand teams because it sounds very academic and clinical. But I can hit you with a million of those: the brand North Star and purpose and mission and vision and values and, pillars. And but what really matters is what kind of experience did your customers have? What do they think? It's their brand. Brand isn't something that we define. You might have some guardrails around it and some aspirations around it, but ultimately, if a person doesn't believe your brand is X, then it's not X yet, you know? And so, like, how do we create those experiences that customers are delighted by? And then as a product leader, like, have a little bit of empathy for the hard work that goes into advertising and digital marketing and design and logo design and naming. And, those are areas that may be outside your responsibility or maybe not. And we use all these terms like we're going to growth hack and product led. But I just ask, to what end? Because isn't the end result to build an enduring and powerful brand that customers love? And so everyone's on the same team.
Yeah.
And so how do you create more inroads? And instead of trying to create more barriers and separation, and it's okay, you can incubate a small, fast idea. I know product teams don't need to be saddled with more people, but what if you took one person from the brand team and brought them in really early and collaborated and got their input? Yeah, you might get surprised by the results.
Yeah, this is super interesting, especially in a world where the ability to write code and ship features is going to be increasingly commoditized, and
building a
anyone can do it.
website, how hard is that going to be?
Yeah. Even a chatbot now, it's like whatever.
Yeah.
So maybe the brand is, and when you talk about the brand, I guess it's the full experience. It's not just the pixels on the screen.
Think of it as an entire customer journey. What happens, as a product leader, don't you care about the very first time someone's ever heard of your product and what expectation has been set? And as they learn about your product, don't you care about what perception they're going to come to the table with? And then as they consider whether to use your product and compare you to competitors, you care a lot about how you show up. But those two steps before have helped shape that. And then as they get into, trial and usage, like, there's all these incredible brand touch points. Do you remember SoulCycle? Right? Like, they built a cult, and, there were like the idea that, like, if you were sitting at the front of the class, that really like meant something. That was a brand touch point. That was a service touch point, a product touch point, you name it. And so, how do we work together? Because what I find oftentimes is when you're so focused on shipping, maybe you're focused a little too narrowly, because, by the way, we've all seen this. The game changes so radically. You lay out an 18-month product roadmap and you're in month 8. I was at eBay when Amazon bought Whole Foods. Don't you think that had a little bit of an impact on our roadmap and strategy? And so, how do we create these like rapid test and learn cycles, inclusive of collaborating with not every brand team? Some brand teams are going to be brand cops, and they too might be thinking too small and narrowly. But like a chief brand officer at a company is probably thinking expansively and cares as much about the product experience. I just wish product leaders cared as much about the brand experience.
Yeah, I hear you. You've given us a lot of food for thought. Before we wrap up, 2 questions. One is like, what's the best like career advice that you've gotten over the years that has made a very, very positive impact on you? And then final thing is like, how can people stay in touch with your latest thoughts and keep up with you?
Thanks, Tom. Don't believe your own hype. That's probably the best career advice. Many of us will wind up in positions where, people are really, drawn to what we have to say because of the role we're in. I've been in some big roles, and it feels really exciting, and like people notice, and that builds, but maybe just don't act that way. Don't believe your own hype. Stay humble and focus on helping people at every level, from caring about what the CEO and president and board member might say about the brand, to what a junior product manager might say about a brand. Like, get advice from everyone at the company, and relate to people at all levels, and sort of don't walk around with that ego. Be vulnerable. These are all important tenets, I believe, of successful careers. And then also, if I may, be kind. Like, it doesn't cost that much more to make a huge difference. Tom, you wouldn't have me on the show if I was a total jerk to you as a manager, and I certainly could have been, but I wasn't. It's so. And then to stay touch, you can follow me. I'm on LinkedIn. If you search under brands, you should be able to find me. I own the LinkedIn /in/brands. Karl Isaac. I'm also on Instagram at Red Glasses Club. And, super excited.
You on Blue Sky?
I am on Blue Sky at Red Glasses Club as well. And so super excited to keep in touch with folks in your community. And I couldn't get Red Glasses Club on TikTok. Like a 7-year-old owns it, and I with like four followers, and I don't have the heart to like try and see if he wants to negotiate sell it. So I have
The
to
squatter.
But he's part of the Red Glasses community. And so, but LinkedIn, Karl Isaac, go to my website, hiitsus.com. And, I'd welcome any thoughts and perspective, but I'll just leave you with the parting thought that I see it all as the same thing.
Yeah. This has been a wonderful catch up, long overdue. And thank you again for being such a great mentor and manager to me that summer. It was a great internship, and made it very easy for me to come back to Microsoft after it was done.
Well, Tom, you were outstanding, and your career has been just phenomenal. And the things that you have to teach, I'm so glad you're doing this mentorship and the coaching and your podcasts, and you've had some incredible roles. What a delight to see how much you have flourished, and I love to keep learning from you. So
it's awesome. We will have to have you back on soon, and stay safe down in LA, and really hoping that we get some rain or the winds die down and things are under control, because it just seems really kind of surreal over there right now.
It's really gut-wrenching, and my thoughts and my heart is with a lot of the people that have lost their homes here. It's really devastating. So
yeah,
I'm glad we found time to do this, and thank you. And let's not wait another decade to catch up.
Indeed. Thank you so much, Karl. Take care, buddy.
Bye.
Bye. All right. That was Karl Isaac. Let me give you my 3 takeaways, and let me know in the comments what you think. I mean, I have to agree with him that in pretty much every organization I've worked at, brand and product, we know each other, we acknowledge each other. We might be in each other's meetings, maybe for annual planning or for major launch review. But the kind of collaboration that Karl is advocating for, I've not seen it done well. I think and it's not because it's a bad idea. I actually believe him that you will produce better experiences for customers and more valuable companies and more successful products because of it. But I think part of it is that the way product managers are measured and evaluated is so often on show me the numbers. And I suppose you could say, well, let's look at like customer experience numbers or brand favorability numbers, but it's hard to attribute this launch to that thing because those are not numbers that move very easily versus like, oh, look, daily active users went up X%. So I think it would require leadership to kind of add another row to the rubric of how people are evaluated. And perhaps even more importantly, have the senior executive leadership ask questions like, okay, tell me the end-to-end experience well beyond your feature or your product, but for the customer with our company, which is not a common question you're going to hear at a launch review. So yeah, super fascinating. And I thought the Elon Musk section of the conversation was also cool because yes, he kind of killed the Twitter brand. And I think in hindsight, like that was unnecessary and probably not great for Twitter really as a company. But you look at Tesla, you could argue like that's a really strong brand that I'm not sure how much brand work they did or how integrated brand was with their team, but maybe Elon as the papa for Tesla kind of brought it all together, and whether he knew it or not, he was applying kind of Karl's proposed approach. But let me know in the comments, like, do you think that the brand activities and efforts and research and initiatives should be more part and parcel of what a PM does than what's typical in our industry? Or do you feel like, well, I get it, but from a practical point of view, you wouldn't want your PM team spending all this time talking about brand stuff if it takes away from their ability to ship a feature that is going to solve that specific customer problem way faster. And I know if Karl were here, he would be like, hey, you're creating a false choice there. But I think some people would wonder like, hey, if my PM's not working on stuff that's getting out the door and landing and having measurable impact quarter to quarter, that PM leader is gonna risk being perceived as not having a team that's producing a lot of impact. So let me know what you think in the comments. It was definitely a thought-provoking conversation, and Karl's a great guy, and what a incredible run that he's been on, working on those big Microsoft brand campaigns, working in agency, working at eBay when it got spun off and got rebranded, or they rebranded themselves. The Adobe kind of moved to the cloud, and then now running his agency and his fractional work as a chief brand officer. So check him out. I'll put links to some of his stuff below. But hopefully this was useful. And if you want to get a summary of other interviews like this that you might have missed, go check out firesidepm.substack.com. All my previous interviews are there, as well as with text kind of summaries for those you don't want to sit through an hour-long interview. Appreciate if you could comment and like. It helps the channel. I'll see you next time. Let's get back to work.